The real horror is never the blood. It's the silence immediately after. If you're still here, don't just watch. Subscribe. You'll want to hear the rest. I see him again, slightly blurred through the half-empty glass of his old-fashioned, the red and gold of the liquor, catching the faint glow of the midnight candles. Francis. Francis Abernathy, my husband, for 12.5 years. He was laughing, that deep, assured laugh that once filled the voids in me, but which now only emphasized the emptiness I had become. We were in the living room of our Boston brownstone, right across from the common, where the ice had taken the tree branches and transformed them into glass lace. It was the last night of the year. The room was filled with our family, my mother, my uncle, and my little brother Bernard Ashcroft. Bernard stood near the window, his back to the room, staring fixedly at the snow that had just stopped. He looked like a figure cut from another era, silent, sober, immaculate in his charcoal flannel suit. He hadn't touched alcohol since the accident, and that was why he was here. I approached Francis. His face was relaxed, slightly heavy with the wealth he had amassed and the whiskey he had consumed that evening. I placed my hand on his forearm. The fabric of his jacket was warm, soft, the Scottish wool he loved. "Ready?" I asked, my voice as flat as a winter horizon line. He turned his honey-colored eyes toward me, a little red-rimmed. He smiled, the smile of a man who believes he has everything, and above all, that he has won. "Right on time, Agnes," he replied, and he squeezed my fingers before letting me go. We were 11 people holding hands in a circle, a ridiculous tradition he had insisted on maintaining every year since we moved in. A demonstration of strength, cohesion, perfect happiness. The small family tragedy we had carried for 3 years was carefully concealed beneath layers of cashmere and champagne. Bernard, still silent, held out his hand to my mother and the other to me. His palm was cold, dry, and taut. I could feel his heart beating, not fast, but with an almost mechanical regularity. It was the heart of a man executing a task. Francis was on my right. His hand, heavy and clammy, tightened its grip on mine. There was a solid gold ring on his ring finger, a gift I had given him for our 10th anniversary. It was a symbolic object of our vows, now a mere fragment of cold metal, weighed down by the truth. The countdown began. Voices mingled, joyful, drunk with anticipation. 10, 9, 8. My gaze met Bernard's over the heads. There was no fear in his eyes, only cold acceptance. A debt being paid. 7, 6. I remembered the first time Francis drank in this house, the night we moved in. He had raised his glass of scotch, the light playing in the amber liquid, and he had said, "To our future, may it be solid and unshakable." He had laughed, and I had believed his words like one believes a prayer. 5, 4. The glass he held was now empty. He had drained it quickly, after I had accidentally refilled it, a little too generously, while he was distracted by Uncle Thomas talking about golf. I had slipped the small capsule into the glass during the clinking of the ice, a gesture so discreet, so choreographed after weeks of practice in the darkness of our kitchen. It was the last in a series of subtle, small doses, but this one was the conclusion. 3, 2, 1. Happy New Year! A roar of joy. Kisses, embraces, the pop of champagne corks sounding like small gunshots. Francis leaned in to kiss me. His lips were warm, dry, smelling of whiskey and triumph. "I love you, Agnes," he murmured into my neck, a declaration he made banal by its frequency, emptied of all true meaning for so long. "I love you too," I replied, and the effort to force those words out of my throat was the hardest thing I had ever done. 12:01. That's when the silence crept in. Not the silence of the room, which still buzzed with wishes and party music, but the silence that settled between Francis and the rest of the world. He swayed. Just for a moment, a slight lurch of his body that a normal observer would have attributed to too much drinking or the emotion of the new year. I tightened my grip on his hand. "Francis." My tone was just concerned enough to be credible, just controlled enough not to betray any panic. He blinked, slowly, too slowly. His grip on my hand loosened, the gold ring sliding against my skin. I feel dizzy," he mumbled, his voice suddenly thick, slurred. "Too much champagne, I suppose." "Come," I said, and I guided his already heavy body. "Let's get you upstairs for some air." At that moment, Francis's mother turned to us, a blissful smile fixed on her lips. "Leave him be, Agnes. He's just having too much fun." "No, Mom," I replied with a sad smile. "He's exhausted. Too much stress at the office. I'm just taking him back to the room for a minute to lie down." I helped him up. He wasn't resisting, which was unusual for Francis. Usually, he would have been angered at being treated like a child. Now he was docile, a mass leaning against me. His eyelids fluttered. Bernard appeared at my side, the discreet shadow I needed him to be. He placed a firm hand under Francis's arm, instantly relieving me of half his weight. "I'll help you, Agnes," he said, his voice neutral, professional. No one paid attention to us. The laughter and toasts continued. We were just two good Samaritans, tending to the overworked businessman. We crossed the hall, our steps muffled by the thick Persian rug. Light from the street lamp filtered through the stained glass window near the staircase, casting patches of dead color, blood red, bile yellow, night blue, onto the white marble floor. Francis was mumbling incomprehensible things, fragments of sentences about figures, stocks, names, words that smelled of secrets, betrayal, but which were now harmless, venomless. "We're here," I whispered when we reached the top. The bedroom was dark, the heavy velvet curtains drawn. The air was cold, damp, a contrast to the warmth of the party downstairs. We laid him on the bed, gently, like a precious object we didn't want to break. Francis slumped onto the silk sheets, his body relaxing all at once. His face was waxy. He was still breathing, but the breath was shallow, wheezing. The dose was not intended to put him to sleep, but to make his body weak, inert, to erase all resistance. I looked at Bernard. He was 25, but he looked like a lost child. His hair was short, his face angular, and his blue eyes were clear as spring water. He was the innocent one, the honest one, the one Francis had destroyed. He's heavy, Bernard said, but his eyes never left Francis's face. Yes, I replied. The weight of his sins, perhaps. I walked over to the wall safe hidden behind a Flemish painting. I entered the code. Francis never changed his codes. He was too confident, too sure of my loyalty. The safe opened with a soft, precise click inside. There was what I was looking for. Bundles of cash, bonds, but also a small leather envelope. I took it out. It contained an old photograph, yellowed at the edges, and a folded letter. I handed the photo to Bernard. He took it, his fingers trembling this time. It was a picture of our little sister, Clara, age 10, taken on her birthday. She was wearing a pale green ruffled dress and laughing heartily, her red hair catching the sunlight. Bernard looked at the photo, then Francis, then me. A silent sob shook his body, but he didn't cry. We had moved past tears a long time ago. "Read it," I murmured, pointing to the letter. He unfolded the sheet of paper. It was written in elegant handwriting, the same script I had seen on so many greeting cards. Love notes, checks, Francis's. He read in a low, broken voice, no longer the calm little brother of a minute ago. It was the best solution. For us. She was asking too many questions about the ledgers. I made a mistake letting her drive that night. The check to the medical examiner settled everything. Don't worry, my love. It was an accident. She should never have messed with my business, Agnes. He dropped the letter. It fluttered, then fell onto the thick carpet, the only sound in the room being Francis's shallow breathing. A subtle flashback. 3 years ago, it was a winter like this. Clara, my sister, his sister. She worked as a junior accountant for one of Francis's smaller companies. It was pouring rain. Clara's car had skidded. A road accident, the police concluded. Francis had been devastated. Or at least, he had played the devastated man to perfection. But Clara wasn't working on Francis's main business. She was handling the accounts for one of his charitable foundations. And Francis had never tolerated anyone poking their nose into his affairs, especially when they were as murky as the Charles River marsh. I had found the letter 6 months ago, hidden in a suitcase lining, the small secret he had kept like a trophy. It wasn't an accident. Francis had forced her to drink during a business dinner, let her take his sports car, and then paid for silence to ensure the case was closed without further investigation. Clara never drank and drove. Francis had done it for her. He had silenced her. I knelt beside Bernard. I picked up the letter and the photo. I looked at Francis. He was nothing but a shadow, his cheeks hollowed out by the moonlight. He couldn't get away with it, I said, not asking a question. It was an assertion. Bernard nodded, his gaze now clear. He destroyed everything beautiful. Francis had taken my sister from me. He had taken Bernard's only friend, the only person who could make him laugh sincerely. And he had taken the only thing left of my marriage, respect. I stood up and walked toward the mahogany dresser. I opened the central drawer. Inside was a small box of dark blue velvet. It contained the key to the cabin we owned by the lake in Seattle, an isolated place, miles from any neighbor, where we went to pretend we were still normal. I took the key, cold and heavy, in my palm. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman I was had gone. All that remained was an architect, a meticulous planner. Bernard was leaning over the bed. Francis had stopped moving. He was still breathing, but so faintly that the movement of his chest was almost imperceptible. "We have to move now," I said. Bernard hesitated for the first time. "What do we do with him?" I raised my hand for him to be quiet, listening to the sounds outside. A burst of laughter, a bathroom door slamming shut. "We don't do anything with him here," I replied, and I smiled, a dry, heatless smile. We just staged the scene. I picked up the key to the cabin on the lake. He went to the cabin 2 days ago. He wanted to spend New Year's there, but he had to come back for the party. A credible lie, because Francis loved the lake. I walked to the wardrobe, a huge closet of solid oak he had built. I took out his large dark leather travel suitcase, the one he used for his Ying business trips. Bernard understood immediately. "There's a flight to Seattle tomorrow morning." "No, there's no Francis on the plane," I said. "There's Francis at the airport." We carried the body into the suitcase. Francis was tall, but Bernard was young and surprisingly strong. The suitcase was made for travel, heavy, durable. We closed it. The zip made a dull, final sound. It was the sound of a secret being sealed. I made sure the bed was messed up. The half-drunk champagne glass was prominent, the pill bottles open. I wiped the stains on the tuxedo. I left the cabin key on the dresser. The scenario was perfect. Francis felt faint, came back home, took an overdose in a panic, and panicked. "The message," Bernard said. I took Francis's phone and composed a text message I had prepared. "I'm exhausted. Heading back to the cabin early. Need to clear my head. Don't worry. I'll call you tomorrow. F." I sent it to myself. Then I looked at Bernard. "You go." Bernard hesitated for the first time. "Alone? You're the only one who can drive without risking a misstep. You're the only one who hasn't been drinking. And you're the only one whose heart hasn't been contaminated by this house." I took the key to our armored SUV, parked in the underground garage, and placed it in his hand. I grabbed the suitcase handle. "The airport is too risky," I murmured, checking the mirrors. "Too many cameras." "The construction site," Bernard suggested, his voice low and tense. The construction site. Francis was building a skyscraper outside the city, a tower of glass and steel. His concrete legacy, a deserted place on New Year's Eve. Perfect. I gave him a waterproof bag containing towels, bleach, and gloves. "You know what to do." Bernard looked at me. He no longer saw me as a sister, or as an accomplice. but as an executioner. "Don't worry, Agnes," he said. "He will be silent. Forever." He got into the car. The engine started with a muffled rumble. He drove out of the garage, Francis's suitcase in the trunk, heading north toward the cold of the steel. I stood there, alone, in the empty garage. The silence was absolute, broken only by the high-pitched whistle of the pipes above my head. I put on my gloves and walked toward the trash can. I picked up Francis's letter and Clara's photo, and I burned them with a kitchen lighter, watching them curl up and turn into light, black ash. When I went back upstairs, the party was at its peak. My mother was drinking mulled wine, laughing heartily. Uncle Thomas was telling a joke. The living room was filled with cheerful cacophony. Francis went up, I told my mother, with an expression of feigned disappointment. He was exhausted. He said he would text me. "That workaholic," my mother grumbled. "Let him sleep, Agnes. He deserves it." I sat down on the sofa, taking a glass of champagne. The bubble was delicious, sparkling, refreshing. I sipped, looking around, the tired businesswoman waiting for her husband. At 2:30 a.m., Bernard returned. He came in through the garage, silently, just as he had left. I was in the living room, alone with my mother asleep on the couch. He went upstairs. I heard the light sound of running water in the bathroom, the sound of cleaning. He came back half an hour later, hands clean, eyes bright, exhausted, but calm. "Done," he said simply. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want details. I just wanted the final silence. Bernard went to bed. I stayed in the living room, watching the city lights slowly fade. I waited for dawn. The script was ready. Francis had gone to the cabin. He was going to accidentally commit suicide there. I had seen him take sleeping pills. He was drunk. I had his text message. I had no idea when he left, or how. Maybe he called a taxi. There were no cameras in the garage. The next day, no one was worried. I showed Francis's message. Everyone smiled, thinking Francis was being overly dramatic. The following days were long. My phone remained silent. I feigned growing concern. After 3 days, I called the office. Francis wasn't there. I pretended to call the cabin. No answer. On the 5th day, I called the Boston police. The officer took my statement, calm, composed, full of useless details about Francis's stress, his secret alcoholism, his occasional use of sleeping pills. I gave them his license plate number. I explained that he was likely to be at the Seattle cabin. 10 days later, the Seattle police found the SUV. It was parked in the muddy driveway next to the cabin. The door was locked from the inside. The sheriff forced the door open. Francis Abernathy was lying on the floor, next to an overturned liquor bottle and an empty sleeping pill case. An accident. A tragedy due to alcohol and stress. The Seattle cabin was known to have a poorly maintained septic tank, requiring costly repairs, often carried out by Francis himself during his DIY weekends. An isolated spot, deep in the woods, near a frozen lake. The medical examiner's report was vague. Massive overdose of sedatives and alcohol. Death, dating back about a week. The body was unrecognizable, due to decomposition and animal bites. I organized the funeral. I cried just enough. Guests looked at me with pity. The elegant widow, broken, but strong. I inherited everything. Millions. The Boston house, the Seattle cabin. Francis had made sure I would be safe. He loved control, and even in death, he wanted to control the perception of his grandeur. Life resumed. Bernard stayed with me. He found a quiet job. He stopped drinking altogether. He was my silent conscience. Time passed. I sold the Boston brownstone. Too many ghosts, I told the buyers. I moved into a modern apartment, all glass and light, without cashmere or velvet. I became a businesswoman. I took control of Francis's companies, cleaning them up from the inside, exposing his frauds in broad daylight, but discreetly, so the fall would be slow, controlled, elegant. A year passed. A year of perfect widowhood. A year of absolute silence. One day, Bernard and I were in Seattle. It was summer, and the lake was deep and cold blue. We were at the cabin. I needed to see the place. It was the site of his last lie. We were sitting on the dock, watching the water. Bernard held a fishing rod, but he wasn't fishing. He was just looking at the water. "The ground is frozen in winter," I said, breaking the silence. Bernard nodded. "It took until spring for it to thaw. I took a weekend at the cabin under the pretext of repairs." "And the suitcase?" He smiled, a sad smile. "The body was too heavy. We could have dug his grave there, of course, but there were too many risks." I took off my wedding ring, that solid gold band I had slipped off Francis's hand on New Year's Eve. I threw it. It fell into the water, silently, immediately absorbed by the blue. "So, where is Francis Abernathy?" I asked. Bernard looked at the water. His blue eyes were like two wells of truth. He pointed the fishing rod, not at the lake, but at the forest. "He's in the concrete wall, Agnes. The one in his building." I felt the cold creep up my spine. No surprise, no shock. Only the final understanding of the magnitude of his action. Francis had never left Boston. He had been the cement of his own legacy. "He was in the suitcase. I took him to the construction site. It was New Year's night. No one was there. He was poured into the west wing, under the last slab, in his own wall. His empire is his tomb." I looked at Bernard. He was the only one who hadn't been drinking, the only one they could never silence. The weight of guilt had vanished from his body. He was free. I stood up, my legs a little numb. "Thank you, Bernard," I said. We left. The cabin remained silent, the lake a perfect blue. Francis's legacy, a glittering tower in the Boston sky, now housing the silence of his own body, a masterpiece of concrete and vengeance. If you made it to the end, then you are exactly the kind of soul who understands. Like and subscribe before the next truth finds you first.